So my first look in Darby, um, first day, actually day prior to the first FTX in Darby, we had just done a couple practical exercises, and now they are calling off the leadership for the first bay planning look, and my name gets called for the planning weasel. And so I was confident. I wasn't too worried about it. Um, because Ibolic had prepared us well for planning. We knew what we needed to do, or what was generally expected of us, because I was in Charlie Company, and there we actually had a very good RI who broke it down for us well and allowed us to kind of explain the step-by-step process that was expected of us, and we had the Ranger Handbook to fall back on. So we utilized our recycles and delegated down to the platoon and busted out a pretty good plan for our first go at things. We had given clear and concise guidance, and my role was to brief about how I wanted to emplace and recon my support by fire position for the mission. So I rehearsed with some of my squad mates who had been weasels in the past. I was ready to do the brief, and the brief came, and I thought I had knocked it out of the park. Walked through all of the engagement criteria, the withdrawal plan, the direct fire control measures that we'd be utilizing, the contingencies if they are taking a both soft and hard contact, and the other squad leaders then gave their piece for the assault and security positions. So in Darby at least, each of the squad leaders gave their piece during the leaders recon portion of the op-board brief. We then continued on, and while we were briefing, some of the other RIs were going around and inspecting weapons. And now, a previous task that was given to the Weasel was to conduct test fires on all the machine guns. So myself, all of our machine gunners, we walked down to the test fire area, put some rounds through the weapons, and made sure that they were all firing the best that they could, being that they're weapons from Ranger, and they've seen an incredible amount of rounds put through them. So we got them to where we can slap some CLP on them and get them rocking if need be. But the thing was, they expected the weapons clean. And so while we were briefing and the other RIs were inspecting the weapons, they were putting their fingers in them and coming out black because we had just conducted test fires. And as a result, myself and a lot of the individual gunners had gotten negative spot reports for having dirty weapons, even though it was a direct task to conduct these test fires. So now there's a couple ways that I could have alleviated that. We could have done the test fires the night prior. We could have done the test fires as soon as we had woken up and then done more time cleaning the weapons. Or we could have been forthcoming about conducting the test fires and not having been able to do any weapons maintenance after that. But since we had done none of those things, they expected the weapons to be clean and in pristine condition, especially since we were about to step off for the FTX and we hadn't done anything significant prior to that. So immediately we got a no-go for weapons maintenance. Moving on to the remainder of the mission, Darby is fairly cut and dry. It's Groundhog's Day every day, to where you do the same thing for the planning look and the same thing for the actions on look. So we knew from the recycles that we would SP. We would do our mounted movement on LMTVs. It's possible we would get graded on the dismount and how coordinated that is. So we had a deliberate dismount plan. It went fairly smoothly, but they ended up not grading us on that. And then we moved on into our react to indirect fire. As long as everybody runs, there are no issues. So we had a fairly fast-paced platoon, and everyone ran through that. No problems there. As long as everyone is quiet, that's another thing, is they like the silence, violence, silence, especially on the IDF graded tasks, to where you don't want a bunch of people, hooting, hollering, rah, trying to get people motivated to move faster. Just an individual soldier discipline thing. People have to shut up and move. And then moving on to the react to indirect fire. React to contact. In that react to contact specifically, since it was our first one, we already, since we had done the practical exercises, we knew it was expected. So as the Weasel, I liked locating myself in the front of the formation. As long as you have a reason for doing it, then that's acceptable. So I gave my platoon sergeant full control of my gun 2, and I was located with gun 1, mostly because in an actual unit, myself being the second senior most experienced NCO, I would want to locate myself with a platoon leader who doesn't have as much experience directing those gun teams in actual combat. So when I was with that gun 1, immediately when we took contact, I was able to get with the PL. He told me that he wanted me to pull the gun up and get it online, so I was able to walk that gun team up immediately and get it rocking. My gunner had never handled a 240 before, and they had assigned the gunner that day. So it was my fault for not making sure that he was spun up on how to actually work the 240. We should have done some machine gun drills, and I should have had him get with some of the guys who had experience, but he did not know to hold the trigger down to the rear, and it was my fault for not identifying that during some of the other test fires or just talking to him. So we were wondering why our guns sounded so bad. It was because he was kind of pulling the trigger like a semi-automatic. And come to the time of the AAR, he was saying how because of the weapon's maintenance, which I had got knocked for earlier, that was why the weapon was not sounding good, opposed to a fault of the user at the time. But entirely preventable. Another thing that we could have chosen differently or requested a different gunner, something along the lines to alleviate the issue prior to it occurring. But moving forward, the react to contact went fairly well, but they deemed we didn't establish any good fire superiority. And then we moved on and established our ORP, and that was the end of our graded look. So in total, I had gotten a go for movement. I had gotten a go for react to indirect, and I had gotten a go for the brief, but I didn't get a go for the weapons maintenance or actions prior to step, and I didn't get a go on the react to contact. So as a result, that lane as a whole was a no-go. And I think the most confusing part about that was the AAR itself, because at the time, the only reason I know exactly what I was graded on was because in my days prior to graduation, I had worked the detail on the Ranger folders, and I was able to pull my packet aside and read through all of my individual comments, all of the RIs, notes that they had written, all of the um, peer evals, and everything that I had done throughout my entire time at Ranger, I was able to look through. Incredibly beneficial. I would recommend to anybody. But my AAR that I got at the time, I thought was very positive, especially for how well he liked the brief and how well the brief went at the time. So I didn't know a lot of these things were no-goes until I had gotten my end of Darby counseling and found out that I was a no-go on my day one weasel look. And so definitely ask questions, and if you are uncertain of how an outcome was, because a lot of times you get very hot and cold responses from RIs to where they tell you that this was good about your mission, but they really didn't like this. You can ask questions and dig into some of the negative feedback that they have for you more, or test some of the positive feedback more, because at the end of the day, the AAR is for you as the individual student. It is for you to take going into your further lanes. So the RI really doesn't have as much of an impact. They're not going to remember this AAR going forward, but this AAR is incredibly powerful for you as the individual student. So take command of it. Do what you can to formulate questions immediately following your lane, because in Darby the AARs are conducted that night. So something that I didn't start doing until Mountains and Florida was immediately following my lane when I got switched out. When I was pulling security later, I would write down an individual AR of how I thought it went, and everything that I didn't do well. I would write out a couple questions to kind of see how the RI viewed it and looked about it, because at the time of your AAR, they've already written out the entirety of the packet. There is no changing it, and there isn't really any arguing your grade, at least in my experience. A lot of the RIs said, hey, your grade has already been decided. There's no arguing at this point. So being receptive to their feedback, but then being able to ask good questions directly about your performance makes a difference moving forward into the later phases and your own development as a leader.